Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week we have an all-new assortment of Horror Bytes Picks to chat about. Yes, you heard that right. For people that maybe missed last week's episode, we have consolidated Horror Bytes into our main Monday episodes. So while Horror Bytes it no longer lives on a Thursday release schedule as it was, have no fear. It's been consolidated into, as I said, those weekly Monday episodes because while we wanted to retweak things slightly, Horror Bytes is so near and dear to our hearts. We weren't ready to kill that one yet.
No, that's it. And, it gives us little different things to talk about each week as well. Like given these, and yeah, we're getting through a few of them each week at the minute, so it's not bad.
Yeah, we've already had a good showing there, and I think this week will prove to be no different.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few very interesting ones to start.
Yeah. Which one of my picks would you want to chat about first for Horror Bytes this week?
Let's go with the additional dimension. I think would be the first one.
Yeah, this was one that I was really excited to check out because of the fact that it is a alternate sort of history, 70s Soviet horror setting, and I'm currently rewatching the Chernobyl series. So I was like, this feels like a natural continuation of my viewing this week. And so with the additional dimension, that's from developer Not So Special Games, and you can find it on itch. It's typically $2. As of recording, it's free, but I think it's safe to say, like, for those $2, it's well worth checking this one out. And so initially this one looks kind of just like another sort of PSX style first person game, but as I said, the writing and the sort of like world building here is quite good. So this is set in the 70s, and you play a scientist on a Soviet facility that are basically trying to venture into this newly discovered dimension. And so, there's an anomaly, you go into it, and then you almost instantly discover like, oh, hey, maybe we should stay in our own dimension because of the fact that you become stuck there. And as the player ventures further, other than creepy oddities that they encounter, they find remnants of other, past expeditions that have gone into this new dimension, and you learn from the mistakes of others and whatnot. I think what was most impressive about this one for me was just like it's very highly polished. Right from the jump, it sets the stage very well. They don't over-explain things. They give you just enough context, but you still feel like you're going into the unknown, just as the protagonist is. On top of that, there's some great voice acting. I'm always, impressed by these bite-sized games that have a more than polished feeling voice acting in them, and not just one voiceover, but like two at that. So I think from a presentation standpoint, it was quite well done, and that is extended to the scares that are in this. There is maybe one jump scare that is not even much of a jump scare, but overall it's more about making the player feel uncomfortable in a space that clearly defies the laws of physics as our own dimension. But I think overall, like, it's just a really great mood piece that doesn't overly rely on jump scares, and rather it just makes the player feel like, oh, this is a place that we're trapped, and yet the only way out is through, kind of a thing. There's like these dissolving walls that you come across. You come across like shadows of past explorers that when you get closer to them, they vanish. And so it does a great job, I think, of just like facilitating that elsewhere universe. And on top of that, there's actually some pretty quality and unnerving writing. Naturally you come across a lot of diary entries from past explorers of this dimension, and I found that did a great job of like unsettling and makes this feel like an endeavor that probably doesn't have a very high success rate right from the outset, but you kind of feel compelled to go deeper into the void, if you will, which I think is always a facet of these types of games. But here it was just done very well. But what did you think of the additional dimension?
Yeah, I mean, from the off, this whole sort of Soviet influence on it really kind of gave it a very particular flavor as well. The idea that you are coerced into this honorary job of like going in there and having no way back out once you're in there, because you are effectively you're the canary in the coal mine for this situation. And that's a great sort of hook for this kind of story. It also just leads well into this really sort of simple color palette, that really accentuates like those more troubling moments when you see him. There's a great use of red in this, when things do go wrong, but mostly it's just grey and black, and that's fantastic too, because you've got all this bleak concrete and tile. There's some brutalist sort of architecture styles in there too. But yeah, it's this good use of looming darkness as well when you are walking down like tunnels and stuff, like just how uninviting it looked to sort of go down those areas. Yeah, there's bits of it where you can kind of see the joins of it being influenced by many a liminal space sort of horror game. But I think having that sort of shroud of like the Soviet era stuff on top really does just make it stand out in that way. And I don't know, thematically it just kind of feels like it fits as well. Like just I think of stuff like Metro and Singularity and stuff like that, where you just have this sort of, it's that kind of technology kind of feel to it. It just kind of makes sense. So yeah, like it does, as you say, just kind of push you to go forward and find out more, because story wise you have no other choice. But I don't, it just has that typical horror thing of just, if you've got good lighting and you can really sort of signpost things nicely in that sort of come hither sort of way, which, like I said, either you have the encroaching darkness to go into, which is intimidating, or what would normally be a welcome flash of color in having this sort of red light ends up being what's coming out, and most of it is some sort of disturbing sight and strangeness in this anomaly. And you aren't really prepared for some of the stuff that does go down in there, which is great, because I did feel at times it was going to get a bit predictable, and it did sort of surprise me without like going wild or anything. So yeah, it was I like the whole package. My only sort of disagreement with you is probably on the voice work. Is like some of it's okay, but I mean, there's a very sort of good Orson Welles-esque voice going on in there, but, which kind of gives it sort of B-movie feel. But just some of the line delivery doesn't hit for me, like just with certain moments and stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's a game that if it didn't have voice acting, it wouldn't have been the end of the world, I think, because the rest of the sound work does well enough on its own. But yeah, but overall, yeah, good package.
Yeah, and to your point about sort of like that muted color palette, that use of reds is very, like Argento-esque, if you will. And there's some really great doomy visuals that really accentuate that use of a color palette as, your journey into the dimension. The further you get, things become more overtly horrifying. And the use of red there really is well executed to kind of like accentuate those certain aspects. And, it's got some good creepy vibes to boot. So yeah, I'm glad this one clicked for you like it did for me. But yeah, I would love next to chat about a game that we played the demo for, which would be Skin Face.
Yeah, Skin Face, which is by Adam Pipe, who, if you listen to the show long enough, you may remember as being the creator of things like No Players Online and Spookware, which was and even the sort of, I think they were partly behind the anthology sort of game Changed as well. But yeah, so Spookware is like a favorite of mine, because it was like this sort of road trippy type game of really like slacker skeleton types, and they would go on this mission to like do these little WarioWare-esque games, and it was great fun. Like it was like this weird collagey sort of effect to it, which kind of gets brought in here to Skin Face, which is a really sort of unique little idea. Effectively, you are like a hitman in this game, going around this sort of tower block in this demo, and the idea is to eliminate the target, you've got to become their friend, quite literally, by taking bits of people's faces and like like bits that would fit the profile of the person you're supposed to be, basically. So matching up what you take that bit, and like really simple idea, but like I don't know, it's that sort of otherworldly nature of it, where you have like real life sort of arms and faces and things like that, and then you have these sort of odd models of people sort of walking around this sort of apartment complex, on the sort of balconies outside doing this. Yeah, I mean, beyond that, I don't want to say too much with the demo, but beyond that, but that in itself, those opening sort of minutes of playing it, where you are just sort of picking parts of faces, and so they just sit there and let you do it, and you kind of see like the whole, the grisly hole left behind by that. Not played for like goriness, but just played for like this almost absurdist idea of just doing this thing to people. Yeah, it's a really clever idea, and it's just got that sort of what I would call signature now for Adam's games as well, where there's just like this offbeat surrealness to it, and it feels like a continuation of that.
Yeah, I loved this premise. I think that, taking this Hitman concept, but applying it in the most like bizarre way possible, in this, like, again, like picking pieces off of others to basically make this design was such a fun concept. And I think that like almost like a Mr. Potato Head style design. And like you said perfectly, the gore is not played for scare factor or even just like being grotesque. It's just like very matter of fact. And I think once you actually like find your target, you're able to make that mask and get up close to them. You get this really satisfying kind of a continuation of that concept of like picking pieces off of faces, but to a much more final degree. So I thought that, it was like a super morbid, but super funny sort of concept that, is literally unlike any other sort of take we've seen on a assassination or Hitman style game. The only thing that I would say about this that I will be curious to see how it shapes out in the final release, but since it's so core to clearly what the experience is, does have me a little worried, and that is the almost like aimless nature of trying to find the right pieces. You know what I mean? Like I found a couple of instances where, you get this black and white photo, and sometimes that photo, because of the fact that it's black and white, it can be slightly difficult to basically corroborate that you have the exact right feature, which I found in a couple of cases, especially with noses, right? Noses that don't have piercings or eyes. Sometimes like the shadowing for the eyes, I couldn't tell if I had the right one or not. So I had to like run back and forth a couple of times to find one. But also it's a little aimless sometimes when you're trying to actually find those pieces, because of the fact that you don't know if the person you're going to interact with to find a piece is going to have what you're looking for. So there were some instances where I felt like, I probably spent 5 minutes trying to find one piece, and that was me running back and forth on different floors of the apartment block. And then also in that second scenario, running around that courtyard for like 5 minutes, just trying to find the one thing that I needed. But again, like it's such an original, fresh concept, and you do get this glimmer of some type of like actual strategy going into it later on when you find the mannequin, right? Where you can save certain pieces, to get through a checkpoint. Like that is a really compelling feature for this type of a game that I think, they can have a lot of fun challenges with that, because of the notion of like, there's going to be layers to an assassination. Like I have to get through this area and then get through that area before I even reach the door of my current target. So I think that'll be fun to see kind of shape up in terms of the final release, which I don't believe this has a release date, right?
Not like I remember seeing.
Yeah, but that does have a demo. It looks like it's to be announced. There's a demo on Steam. It's well worth checking out. I probably spent, I don't know, what do you think? 20, 25 minutes playing this. But
Yeah.
it definitely has some promise to it.
Yeah, absolutely. For what's to come, I do think there'll be some of these things ironed out slightly. So your second pick was an interesting one because it's mostly like a visual novel game, but it's a little bit different. That's End Approach. Yeah, tell us about that one.
Yeah, as anyone that has listened to Horror Bytes over the last year or two knows, like we have this great affinity now for these visual novels because of the fact that we get to not only get these great displays of writing, but at the same time, like seeing how creatives are able to blend like these really interesting story ideas with naturally the visual medium of games, and sometimes that can just be a wall of text that you click through, and sometimes they are games of end approaches, like which is pairing visuals and a little bit of interactivity with that narrative in a manner that makes for something that truly is a wonderful sort of like merger of those two mediums. And so End Approach is from developer Cuttlefish of Doom, which we're keeping that running list of really memorable developer names. And this is available on itch. It was made for a micro visual novel game jam with the strict asset limitations and a 1,000 word limit. And that was initially one of the things that jumped out to me was that, you are confined by a word count. And so seeing how creatives are able to take that ceiling, which, for anybody that's written anything, like getting to 1,000 words is not terribly difficult. So the notion that you're going to create this world, make it intriguing, make it, hopefully horrifying, in just 1,000 words, I think was something that really stood out to me about this. And so End Approach finds the player confined to a crane bed after an event has ravaged the landscape around them. And so you basically are in this, however many 1,000 feet in the air crane bed, and you've run out of food. And what you do in this game is the interactivity piece, you're looking through the window of the crane, and you're basically able to rotate your view left or right. And when you do that, you get to see various locations that are in this basically landscape. So when you're looking out there and you're maneuvering, you're rotating the crane cockpit, you see a prison. If you choose to click on the prison, you get just a couple of sentences that give you, not only a background on the prison, maybe its past history, but also a reflection of its current history. And so, the event basically of this game is that there's some kind of plague or zombie outbreak, essentially. If you're reading about the prison, and this is one of the great little bits of writing in this game, is that, you get to read the prison got raided early on because it probably had weapons, but then you get this last sentence that really is like haunting. And that's some of my favorite horrors, just like something that makes you realize like there is no hope. And it describes the prisoners that are still locked in the prison and the fact that they can't get fresh water. And that's kind of like how it ends. It just says something along the lines of like, yeah, some people might have food, but there's no way for some of those prisoners to get fresh water. And that basically seals their fate, right? There's also a school. And when you click on the school, it talks about, the bells still ring at 3 p.m., 6 p.m., and 9 p.m. So like these little bits of dialogue that, you might assume if you click on the grocery store, it's going to talk about it getting raided for supplies. But there's always one last little line with these, I think there's like 8 locations you click on, something that just it sucks all the air out of the room kind of a thing in a very subtle way. Something that you would never think about. And usually when people are writing specifically about, zombie or plague or infection type horror, people are always focused on like the carnage that the zombies, unleash on people and whatnot, or you read about survivors that are turning on one another. But here, it's more providing these brief little glimpses into the ways in which these locations would operate in the normal world, how they still do to some degree in the post-apocalypse, if you will. And I think that does a really great job of like grounding that setting, and again, making it very haunting. And so I found that for something that takes, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes, that's at the most, I really appreciated that word count because it very clearly forced Cuttlefish of Doom to really kind of like stretch some different muscles maybe than some people might normally when they're writing zombie fiction. And I think here, this is all the more memorable for those reasons. So how did you find this one though, being the person that kind of like reintroduced and reinvigorated my love of visual novels?
Yeah, this is being like that sort of apocalyptic story, and I'm always fascinated by ones like this anyway, where you are just like a lone survivor who kind of just stumbled out of it somehow, some way, sort of having a recollection of the things that have happened around them. The method used here is so smart, as you said, with the crane and having power just enough to do like basically one last turn around of the crane to see the landscape and sort of think about each environment, and then to eventually kind of figure out what you're going to do afterwards, sort of thing. But yeah, it's using that word limit to tell those little stories in each place. Like again, something that's very prevalent on the internet is those sort of two sentence horror stories, things like that. And you can, while these are slightly longer than that, it's like that kind of thing's proof that you can really tell something quite strong if you use the right words and to set the right idea in your head. But with that little visual idea in front of you of what's going on, it's enough to sort of expand upon that. Like it means that you make the most of those words by having just that little bit of visual language to kind of help you out. And yeah, I think it's really strong in how it goes about telling each little story. Yeah, sure, they're typical apocalypse stories, but yeah, that's because we've heard them so many times. That's all. But I do think the delivery of them here is strong because of the way it is executed. And yeah, I'm a sucker for ones that are quite doom and despair, and the shred of hope is not really comforting, sort of thing. And like it's very much like dealing in the impact of these things properly, and yeah, that in itself adds that sort of chilling factor, I guess. So and yeah, I've really enjoyed it. For something so compact to maximize not only the words but just like the minimalism of it all. Just to be basically a left to right sort of thing and clicking on things. Simple as that, and telling a story like that, but it feels engaging, which is important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for something like this, we see a lot of games that have multiple endings. This one has two, and for both of them, I definitely wanted to seek out that second one right after because it's relatively short, but at the same time, some of those lines of dialogue are so memorable for me that it was just like rereading a passage of a book that I really like. If I'm like reading some King or something, it's like, oh, I want to reread that because it really stuck with me, and so this was no different in that regard. So we see lots of these horror bites that brag about multiple endings, but rarely is the writing so compelling that I feel like I have to dive right back into it immediately after finishing it the first time to get the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you had one more horror bite for us this week that was more of the FPS fare.
Yes, which, if I'm saying it right, detritus.
That was my bet for how it was pronounced. So
yeah, suddenly it came to me. I was like, I'm not sure, but there we go. Yeah, which is like a throwback sort of first-person shooter from late '90s sort of time. With a backstory of like a version of Earth where you've got this unprecedented level of wastage now because of hyperconsumption. Apparently, we should be so lucky, sort of thing. But yeah, so like there is like masses of trash, like city-sized amounts of trash everywhere. They call these heaps middens, I think it is, and yeah, so you get this premise of like the souls of old living matter have fused with the waste and trash to basically create armies like trash monsters, like, which is it's perfect for what this is, and you basically just fight off waves of them with a variety of like guns. In very typical sort of first-person shooter fashion, very quick moving, lots of bunny hopping, flipping around, and like dual wielding occasionally as well when you get the chance. I mean, straight away the environments, when you picture the idea of like an Earth where trash is just so prevalent like that, it gives you a very clear idea of what you're looking at, what your kind of visual style you're going to get for this. And yes, it is very ugly brown, grey, green stuff, but yeah, thematically makes sense. So it's like, yeah, that's cool. And yeah, everything looks very simple in that regard, and I think that's a smart move. Especially given the speed and the detail that you do need to sort of go around with this. I mean, any game that sort of reminds me of like the slick speed of it all, from those games back in the day, and where it just every shot kind of feels satisfying. Even if it's barely registering in your brain for like half a second, because you're onto the next thing, onto the next thing. Like, it's a really like simple, despite I think the description of the story is probably bigger than anything you'll see in the game in terms of like really translating into what you see. It's just like an excuse to say, this is why the game will look like this. This is why you're fighting enemies that look like that, sort of thing. And that's fine. It does the job. And the important thing it had to do was basically show you, everything that's going on and give you this impetus to sort of fight these monsters. And it does the job. Yeah, which is absolutely fine. And it looks good enough for what it's doing. It gets that across and plays pretty well, to be honest. Like, I do like there's little modifiers to it, that you can alter like your jumping style and your momentum boost. But you kind of have to like balance things out. I think there's like that thing with a shotgun where you can basically get these sort of momentum boosts and stuff, but obviously it takes ammo to do so. But it was fun experimenting with that, and I don't know, it's reminded me of that sort of giddy glee of just like flinging yourself across a level, like in really quick speed and getting those sort of twitchy reactions back. We've covered a couple of sort of first-person throwbacks this year where the giddy joy of it all was like, oh, I could still do this. I could still do this like twitchy old school shooter stuff, and it still feels great. It's just because generally shooters have slowed down a bit, which is not terrible. It's just, being made for consoles, they tended to be quite sluggish by comparison, because they had to sort of take that sort of control scheme into the concerns of it all. But yeah, I had fun with it. For as simple an idea as it is, it does the job. And that soundtrack, man, that sort of drum and bassy 90s thing, very deliberate choice again. Works wonderfully. It, like I say, it feels like a throwback in all the best ways, I find. And yeah, I had a good time with it. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, this really felt like a return to like the days of my playing Quake 3, like against bots, just like running through this arena. And it's all about like the Twitch mechanics that we kind of miss to some degree. Maybe it's more nostalgia than anything, but I feel like Detritus did a really good job of kind of like embodying that arena style. And as you said, like, I just love the way in which you can, bound around that environment and you can go as quickly as you want to, basically. But there is still that facilitating, like the need for speed, because of the fact that you have such a low ammo count. You take so much damage from enemies that you do have to, not only memorize the locations of ammo and health spawns throughout the map, but it really is important to be able to maneuver those environments as quickly as possible. Because, as I said, enemies deal a shit ton of damage to you, and it doesn't take much to kill you. I think as satisfying as the shooting was, for me, it was really about the ability to parry incoming projectiles with that katana. That was so satisfying, because you get this brief, like, half second of slow-mo before you launch it back into that enemy's face. And that was always super satisfying. And, also a layer strategy to a 90s-esque arena shooter that's not as common, who's to say the influence there, but it reminded me immediately of Doom the Dark Ages, right? Getting to parry incoming projectiles is not only like, yeah, it's a cool feature, but it's also essential. And so I think pairing those types of abilities on top of things that are very common, like sliding and dashing, it really makes it so that way players have a lot of means for the survival that I didn't necessarily feel like if those features were not there, this might have been more frustrating. But for me, I felt like, the level of difficulty was high enough that when you have all those features, it's up to the player to master them because they are able to make it something that is quite manageable once you actually master those various abilities. So I think for me, this was a great little like nostalgic horror bite, but at the same time, like it has a layer of design that again like supersedes the nostalgia in favor of something that feels retro but doesn't feel overly reliant on that nostalgia because of the fact it has these like modern amenities and modern sort of like approach to a classic format. So um, I don't know if this was supposed to be developing into a full-fledged release or this was just kind of this little experience.
Well, yeah, I think the developer Spooky Stevie says this is like their first game jam entry
Okay.
they've ever done. They did they've got a Wild Jam 95, which is like the theme was retro. So yeah, I don't know if it is getting turned into anything bigger, but as a first sort of game jam sort of thing, it fits that wonderful little compact nature of it all, where you get that snack size stuff. But when games are generally designed with that in mind, they done well. They fit that model perfectly. And as we said, we've seen so many games expand from that, and become bigger things as a result. But I wouldn't mind if there was a bit more to it. But as it is still, I quite like that sort of snack size idea of it.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? We always talk about this where it's not always that something actually needs to be expanded, but that kind of just is something that we typically will say some because it's like, well, we enjoyed it so much or we see promise here, but as it stands, this is a horror bite that definitely stands on its own, I suppose.
Yeah, it does.
But yeah, that's going to do it for our horror bite picks for this week. So why don't we take a quick break and when we come back, we can chat about the other games that we've been playing in our grab bag feature. But we'll have more on those in a moment. And we're back from our break. And Neil, why don't you kick things off? You've been playing something that's in the realm of a visual novel, but it's more of the anthology based. So why don't you tell me how you've been enjoying Stories Untold?
Yeah, like a game that I've never got round to, despite owning for many years. I think it celebrates its 10th anniversary next year. But with obviously the developer going on to make Townfall, Silent Hill Townfall this year, like I thought I'd got to get in and have a look at this game finally. And the conceit is that it is supposed to be like a visual novel, like but done in this very particular way. So everything in this is like about sort of machinery and throwback machinery, so stuff from the 80s, but it seems to be like the key sort of idea. So that'd be like science equipment or just like a ZX Spectrum-esque old computer in the first episode and things like that. But they all kind of have like connective tissue and there's like this meta sort of thing going around in it. So it's hard. It's a text adventure that sort of builds outward, and does different things. And like I said, you interact with each element of it by doing a very different job. So that first episode called "The House Abandoned" is literally like a old school text adventure on an old school Spectrum-esque computer, like where you get to choose a command and like a word to go with that command, like you would. So rather than type out yourself, you just pick those two things to make the choice, and it does that. And you follow it. It'll give you the description of where you're going, and then you say, "Oh, like go here or look around," just to sort of see what other details you can bring up, or read something to get more information. And so it starts all very normal like that, but you're viewing this screen as someone sitting in front of a desk, with like the keyboard and the computer and this old school sort of television there, going through it. And the first time you go through it, it's normal, but then it starts going a bit weird. and it gets very, very sort of like meta in terms of what happens in the repeating of that story, where things change about it, and it sort of bleeds into the world of the game, and yeah, there's a very definite ending to each chapter. Each chapter has its opening credits, end credits sort of thing, like that. They take, depending on how you sort of get on with the sort of structure of them, like about half an hour to 45 minutes each, like, and that's great. But they're very tactile, like that first one, while it is just very simple stuff in terms of you're not typing out everything, it does feel like you're doing something. I mean, you can look around a little, not much, but there's like little visual changes to the environment as things go on, and like these little creepy things that happen, based on what you do and how it sort of starts merging into the real world. But it's beyond that when you start getting into the different jobs and you get a lot of voice acting coming in and stuff like that. Yeah, this little anthology kind of starts to knit together in these cool ways. I mean, the second story has got more of a sci-fi sort of flavor where you're doing these experiments on this artifact, and like you have to do it in a very sort of humdrum worky way where you're looking at this very old computer, like going through the different programs, like seeing what you do to work this, and then you go back to this experiment area where you've got all these different machines that do different things, and you have to set them at certain ways to make the experiment sync up with what the other people are doing. And if that happens, you get like this little flashy light and that tells you can do the experiment, and then you get a little bit of a cutscene and the next experiment sort of comes out of it. But yeah, it builds and it builds, but I think that second one was like my favorite of the four stories, just because of, again, how it bleeds bits of the previous story into it, also in how it sort of like, again, sort of pulls the player into this story as well, and just feeling like, well, what am I in this story? Who am I to this story? And what is going on? And how much control do I have? It feels like you're in a text adventure yourself whilst playing text adventures, and whilst also doing a role-playing thing effectively of a character in each scenario. It's really atmospheric, considering it is really simple in each thing, where each thing is basically a couple of screens, like you'll flip between this area or that area, or maybe even just one screen, and little things will just change as the story goes on. It's so effective, and I was so impressed with it. It was more than I expected from what I'd heard about it. When you hear text adventure, you have very typical assumptions of it, especially when you see like the key art for it, and it's all this old school machinery, and you think, oh, so it's going to be like a throwback like that. But yeah, I just love how it just sort of weaves that story together, and it's quite exciting sort of coming into it at this point, knowing they're doing Townfall as well, because yeah, there's stuff about it that just makes me think, yeah, they understand psychological horror and like messing with your head sort of stuff really well. Like, and yeah, it's left me very, very excited for that. But yeah, this is a fantastic game. I'm glad I finally got around to it after all this time. Like, despite having it good, I think I may have started it once, like a long time ago, but yeah, it's I clearly didn't get very far in. But I mean, even if you just play like that first episode, the House Abandoned, it's such a cool idea. Like, and having that sort of ZX Spectrum throwback thing, even down to like the screechy noises when the game is loading up, and like the screen sort of like loading up in bits and pieces like it used to. Yeah, I absolutely loved what it did. It was very much on a whim, sort of playing it this week. But other than that, but yeah, glad I did.
Yeah, this was one that I wish I had gotten around to playing at some point, because no code. I've played their other game, Observation, which was you're in a space station and you basically can control cameras, and it's about the AI and how it interacts with humans and stuff. But like I remember the storytelling in that was like very intriguing to me. And so with Stories Untold, though, which, God, that game almost being a decade, again, like making me feel very old. But I do remember when this initially came out, I kind of had a similar feeling to you when I saw like, the presentation of analog tech being seemingly so integral to, the experience and setting the mood, which, that can work obviously, but there has been an over reliance on using retro tech to establish, a setting or a period. And it's not always done to the degree that actually feels like it serviced anything other than our own like fleeting nostalgia. So to hear that like it actually is able to utilize that analog tech and the vibes, but at the same time, it's not the end all be all. The experience is like just makes me want to check this out before we get around to Townfall, which comes out in just a few months. But I think also what I really like is that the world and the storytelling evolves past the text adventure aspect, like you were saying. Like things start to happen in the environment around you. The game is reactive to the player's progress in those stories and whatnot. And that's a component that I think has a lot of potential to it. It's the type of thing where you get to kind of break out of the game, if you will, a little bit, and then see the ramifications on the protagonist's world. Other than that,
so yeah, it doesn't surprise me that it was headed up. No Code was headed up by like John McKellen, who was sort of responsible for part of Alien Isolation. Just this whole retro tech thing. Like there's a thing about it that just feels right. That would be a continuation of that. So yeah, it's the understanding of what the idea is. Like it's very much like when the Chinese were in It Still Wakes the Deep, where it's like just getting that flavor of a time and place without like just doing that eye rolling nostalgia stuff. I mean, even the soundtrack is very synthy, and that could be like feel detrimental or just like a little crowd pleasing, but it's truly fits. It truly feels natural in a way, rather than just like homage.
Yeah. I guess also I just was looking it up. I guess No Code has rebranded into Screenburn Interactive. That's their new rebranding for Townfall, which, as I said, is going to come out in September. But I think I don't know how you played this one, but Stories Untold seems like a great kind of Steam Deck game if that's on there.
No, I played this on PS5.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I mean, I have it on both, I think. But again, one of those where you keep buying games and you're like, oh, okay. For some reason, I still not played them, but okay. I mean, it seems true of Observation, I think, as well. But it's I like that. I think again, I'm kind of glad I came to it now in a lot of ways, just because of the amount of visual novel and text adventures and point and click games we played, where it's just like to play something that feels quite luxurious whilst being really simplistic is quite a treat in this sort of space.
I'm gonna have to add that one to my list, like I said, because I think after I get over my Marvel Midnight Suns addiction that I'm gonna talk about again for yet another week's episode, I'll need something maybe a little bit different. But that the only thing that I really have been playing, and it's a game that's been occupying every free moment I have, seemingly, is Marvel Midnight Suns, which I finally picked up the season pass for the DLC because there was the Epic Game Store had their summer sale, and I'd gotten the base game for free on one of their giveaways, and then unfortunately, they don't have sales as frequently, so I was like, I want the DLC. I don't know that I need to pay full price because I don't know how substantial it'll be, and now I just feel silly for not buying it sooner because it's not just that you get 4 new heroes, that being Deadpool, Vamp, Venom, and Storm, but you get, or Morbius, not Vamp, but Metal Gear Solid on the brain for some reason. But each one of these characters comes with their own missions that, have an actual narrative around them, much like normal story missions do. And at the same time, you get some extra costumes for your heroes and things. But, when we chatted about my time with the base game a few weeks ago, there's some horror elements to it. There's like the undead, Elseworld kind of a thing. But the DLC, I find, really brings the horror front and center in a way that I really respect. There's this whole notion of like the vampires being introduced, obviously with like Morbius and things. But there's like these missions that are called feeding frenzy early on. It might be like the second or third one, where you have to deal with basically a vampire outbreak in a city and you have to protect civilians from getting eaten. They also introduce these like vampire incubation pods that after you play 4 or 5 cards, it literally starts to hatch mini vampires. And I think that also like dealing with new enemies could very simply be a thing where you're like, oh, okay, these are some new enemies. They have more health or they have more shield, like almost like reskinning. But here, like the vampires have an ability where, you know, they attack you, and all of a sudden, if you start using some of your cards that get infected, you basically contract the bleeding effect, or you start taking damage every turn. So there is this much more prevalent horror aspect to the missions and the structure that's not only like thematically, but it also comes through in the gameplay in a way that I really appreciate. And also, each of the heroes that you get are fully thought out heroes that are developed with the same level of care that the base heroes in the vanilla version of Midnight Suns have, in terms of like their strengths in combat and the various abilities that they have, and each one of them has their own sort of um, progressive abilities in terms of like Venom. You know, he grows more dangerous with each turn because he gains these tokens. With Deadpool, when he deals damage, his cards will get a modifier that just builds and builds. Like there's a variety of new abilities that I think can fundamentally alter the makeup of one of your teams that you choose to kind of like take out with you on missions. And yeah, it was just like, furthermore, like I think I've got more than 100 hours with this game. So this is easily like one of my favorite games probably of all time. I just keep coming back to it. I haven't even finished. I'm on the final mission for the main story for the vanilla version.
Yeah.
Haven't completed that yet, and I'm just running through the DLC missions right now. And yeah, it's going to be bittersweet when I get there, but it's easily one of the best experiences I've had this year, and I continually kicking myself for not getting to it sooner when you brought it up last year.
Well, yeah, but then you're getting to experience it in your own time and get to enjoy it like this. It's like sometimes that's just it. A game comes to you at the right time, and you have the time and the patience to sort of invest in it, and that helps so much. It's like one of my things I do sort of lament with games like that normally is that the DLC will come out and it's like, well, I've just played the game and I don't really want to do any more sort of thing. So you don't really feel as into it. I think you've got the benefit here of like you've played enough of the game that you, oh yeah, get the DLC, put that in, and sort of keep the story going, and it's basically giving you extra life in your story. So it does, which is great. I mean, again, the character choices as well are so smart. Like adding to that sort of base bunch of characters you get. But yeah, the fact that they are so like mini expansions in their own right is great. And everything Firaxis has done in the past in terms of adding expansion content and integrating it into a main game is like it's on show here in terms of what they do, where you can play the game without it, you don't lose anything at all, but it's so much fun to sort of see how that all fits in and works together with it. And yeah, and each chapter really does work for the characters as well. Like the Deadpool stuff is exactly what you expect from a Deadpool. You know, it's very breaking the fourth wall stuff. It's happening all the time, and but yeah, just like Storm is great to have, and like Morbius, like a character that unfortunately in a larger public image, has a very particular reputation these days. But it really is a character that gets the benefit of like being in a game where, much like a few characters in this, where they're not necessarily the most popular in terms of comic book characters, but this game sort of brings out extra in them for you, where you go, oh yeah, I like this character. I'd like to know more about this character now, like, and find out a bit extra. But and just seeing, this sort of horror tinged, version of Marvel Universe, especially as you said, with these DLC packages, adding so much of the vampire stuff to it. Which again is like great at the main story, where you get like little hints of it, like, and then the fact that it's there, built in, and you can just have more of it, like, and get to explore a whole new path. Yeah, it's great. I just that game is just a miracle in so many ways. Like, it's the best Marvel game that has been I think, generally. And it was unfortunately criminally underplayed and undersold. And we probably won't get a sequel, as we've talked about, but and for the wider Firaxis sort of universe of things, the people that have left, we probably won't get anything like it or XCOM again. But it's not a terrible way to bow out.
No,
better than the XCOM Chimera Squad in terms of really flexing their muscles and showing they can do all this great stuff with a license like that. Yeah, fantastic. Well, definitely, like I said, definitely one of the best uses of Marvel property in video game form.
Yeah. And I mean, even though who knows, there obviously won't be more content for it. There might not ever be a sequel, but I think what you get, if anything, my time with the game speaks to just what you get is more than enough. This is a full-fledged experience that I'll always want more, but I think I'm fully satisfied by the time I'll get to the end of the DLC, and especially when I get around to finishing that final mission for the vanilla version of the game. But just immensely in love with this game, and I think it's probably one of my favorite games of the last I'll say 5 years or so. It's just, I was so at odds with the notion that this was going to be really great just because of the card stuff, the arena nature of it, but it just comes together so well. And I'm continuously bumping up that difficulty, which for the last 20 hours kind of made it feel like almost a new game in the way that I had to restructure my decks and whatnot. So I just really can't recommend this game enough, and highly recommend people don't skip the DLC because it is as well thought out as the base game stuff is. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's it's a Marvel RPG. Right. The base of it all, how can you not want that?
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is that as with all of the characters that were included in the base game, the voice acting for the 4 new characters again is basically the best versions that you could get outside of whatever is depicted in the films. So again, you can feel the love for these characters, and the thought has been put into portraying them as accurately as possible. So yeah, really great, fantastic additions, and it's not to be slept on.
Definitely not.
But that's going to do it this week for our edition of Horror Bytes in our grab bag. And next week, maybe we'll have maybe a feature. We'll throw that into the mix, but we'll talk and see how that goes. But until then, my friend, as always, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as it helps us immensely in ensuring the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next Monday.